The towering stone pillars of the Riverbend City Justice Hall rose like ancient sentinels under the gray morning sky. Their weathered surfaces seemed to whisper warnings that truth, once spoken, could shatter lives beyond repair. Inside the marble-floored corridor, hurried footsteps and murmured voices echoed beneath arched ceilings. Oil portraits of past justices lined the walls, their gazes cold and judging. It was not a place meant for comfort. Standing just beneath one stained glass skylight was 6-year-old Lila Thompson, her thin arms buried deep inside the sleeves of a faded green cardigan. She looked impossibly small against the courtroom's grandeur, clutching the end of a braided red leash. On the other end was a large Belgian Malinois named Echo, whose sharp eyes scanned the hall with practiced vigilance. A deep scar marred the side of his neck, a jagged streak of missing fur, a souvenir from his former life in the military. Echo's stance was calm, but alert, a quiet contradiction to his powerful build. He stayed close to Lila, his movements patient and deliberate. The scar told a story to those who dared look closer, of danger once faced, of battles survived. And like the little girl beside him, Echo bore the invisible marks of trauma. Just behind them stood Mara Thompson, Lila's mother, her hands clenched tightly in front of her. A single tear hung in the corner of her eye, refusing to fall. She glanced down at her daughter, aching with the memory of everything stolen from them. It had been 9 long months since that day, since Lila had spoken her last word, since the girl who once sang loudly from the back seat had gone completely silent. A figure in a navy suit approached, Attorney Clara Wu, a soft-spoken but fierce advocate for children. She placed a steady hand on Mara's arm and offered a small nod. "The judge is ready," Clara said. "Are you?" Mara exhaled and gave a shallow nod. Lila didn't move, but Echo shifted closer, brushing against her leg. A flicker of life returned to her eyes. She held the leash tighter, and together, the child and her dog stepped toward the courtroom doors, into the storm that waited on the other side. "In here," Clara whispered, ushering them gently as 2 officers pulled open the heavy doors. The courtroom was silent, not with peace, but with pressure. Wood-paneled walls rose high on either side, and the air smelled faintly of lemon oil and stale nerves. Dozens of eyes turned as Lila Thompson entered, holding tightly to her dog's leash. She walked slowly, flanked by her mother and Clara. The gallery held families, officers, reporters, all waiting for the fragile truth. At the defense table sat Victor Harlan, the man accused of destroying Lila's innocence. Dressed in a sharp gray suit, he leaned back in his chair with unnatural calm. His eyes, when they lifted, were sharp, calculating. And they found Lila like a spotlight. Echo sensed it before anyone else. The dog's muscles tensed just slightly, enough for Mara to glance down nervously. Lila's grip on the leash tightened, but she kept walking. Presiding over the courtroom was Judge Lenora Castillo, a woman known for her steely exterior and unexpected compassion. Her gaze swept across the room and settled on the child. Her gavel came down once, a crisp snap. "Court is in session." They moved to the witness table. Clara helped Lila into her seat while Echo positioned himself beneath her chair, never breaking eye contact with Harlan. Victor Harlan didn't flinch, but the slight twitch of his jaw betrayed recognition. Perhaps he remembered the dog, the flash of fur and fury from the alley behind the old train depot, the night Lila was found, shaking and silent. As the judge reviewed the docket aloud, Echo gave a low, controlled rumble. Not a bark, just a warning. One of the bailiffs looked up, startled. "Objection," snapped Anthony Madsen, Harlan's attorney, rising from his chair. "Your Honor, This animal is clearly a disruption. The defense requests that the dog be removed during testimony. Judge Castillo didn't blink. Mr. Madsen, Echo is a certified trauma support canine with court approval. He is here to ensure the witness remains emotionally stable. Her voice dropped slightly. He stays. The lawyer sat down slowly, though the stiffness in his shoulders betrayed unease. And in the middle of the courtroom, beneath layers of silence and ceremony, a girl who had not spoken in nearly a year rested her hand on a dog who understood everything. For a long moment, nothing moved. The courtroom breathed in silence. Then Lila lifted her hand, trembling, uncertain, and rested it gently on Echo's head. It wasn't to calm him. It was to steady herself. The moment drew every eye. This was the girl no one expected to speak. No one, not even specialists, had predicted she would return to a courtroom, let alone be its most crucial voice. But here she was, her small frame next to a battle-worn dog, the two of them bound not by language, but by understanding. Across the aisle, Victor Harlan remained still, but a flicker of something, tension, memory, fear, passed through his eyes. Maybe he recognized Echo. Maybe he remembered the dog's bark, the flash of fangs, and the chaos of headlights and sirens, the night his grip on Lila was finally broken. Judge Castillo turned toward the prosecution. Ms. Ahmed, you may begin. Nadia Ahmed, Assistant District Attorney, rose with quiet poise. Ladies and gentlemen, she began, today you will hear evidence, timelines, facts. But what matters most isn't data. It's the silent truth carried by the child you see before you. She gestured subtly toward Lila. Nadia spoke of the day Lila vanished, of the hours that passed before she was found. Alone, terrified, hiding behind a dumpster near the train yard. Of the dog, Echo, who had tracked her scent through 3 city blocks. Of the single hair tie found in Harlan's car. The witnesses who saw his sedan near the Thompson home, days before the abduction. Lila sat motionless, but her eyes never left the floor. Echo's ear twitched with every mention of Harlan's name. No one knew if Lila could testify, even in signals. But even now, her presence was a statement, and Echo's body language, alert, protective, was impossible to ignore. Let the court remember, Nadia continued, that dogs do not fabricate. They do not rehearse. They do not spin narratives. Echo responded to the presence of a man who had once threatened the life of the child he now protects. Judge Castillo gave a slight nod. Lila hadn't said a word, but she was here. And that was enough to shift the energy in the room. Because beneath the silence, a reckoning had begun. One forged by scars, memory, and the quiet strength of a child who had learned to survive. A year earlier, the Thompson household had been a place of ordinary joy. Their modest home on Willow Creek Drive was filled with soft laughter, weekend pancakes, and bedtime stories read under glow-in-the-dark stars. Mara, a part-time librarian, spent her evenings curled on the couch with a book in one hand and her daughter's hair tangled in the other. Daniel Thompson, a carpenter and former Army medic, found peace in fixing things: cabinets, fences, broken toy wings. But some wounds couldn't be patched so easily. He carried scars from overseas, not visible ones, but the kind that echoed in his sleep and left him staring at ceilings too long. Still, Lila's voice could chase those shadows away. When she giggled, it filled the house like sunlight through a cracked window. That Sunday had felt like any other. Lila skipped through the front yard, pink barrettes bouncing in her curls, hopping from flagstone to flagstone like she was crossing a lava river. Inside, Mara baked lemon muffins for a new neighbor down the road. Daniel sat on the porch with a mug of tea, reading the classifieds, glancing up every few seconds just to watch his daughter play. Then, without warning, a silver-blue sedan rolled slowly down the street. The driver looked ordinary. Short, dark hair, collared shirt. Nothing alarming. But Daniel's eyes narrowed. The car eased to a stop near the edge of their lawn. Lila paused mid-hop, looking curiously at the stranger. He rolled down his window and smiled. "Hi there," he called. "New to town. Can you tell me how to get to Valley Springs Road?" Before Lila could answer, Daniel stood. "Lila," he said with quiet warning, folding his newspaper. Lila turned, hesitating. It's down that way," she said, pointing toward the stop sign. Daniel joined her at the edge of the yard, standing slightly in front. "You take a left at the light, then second right. Straight shot." The man nodded slowly. "Thanks." But his eyes lingered on Lila too long. Daniel noticed. The sedan pulled away, slow, deliberate, and vanished around the corner. Mara called from the kitchen. Lila bounced back toward the porch. Daniel didn't answer. He kept watching the street, a chill running up his spine. Because something deep in his bones, told him that wasn't the last time they'd see that car. The next day, Daniel tried to brush off the unease, but it lingered, like the last breath of a nightmare that refused to fade. Something about that man's eyes, or maybe the way his fingers gripped the steering wheel. Too tight, too rehearsed. That silver sedan showed up again 2 days later, just passing by. Then again the day after that. At first, Mara thought he was imagining it. "It's a new neighbor, hun. Maybe he's just getting his bearings." Daniel didn't argue, but he started locking the side gate, making sure the front door was bolted even in broad daylight. He taught Lila not to answer the door alone, not even if she knew the person. Still, the car kept appearing. Slow, casual, always coasting near the end of their street, never stopping, just watching. Finally, Daniel called an old friend from the sheriff's department, Deputy Marcus Lynn. "I don't have a license plate yet," Daniel admitted over the phone, "but I swear he's scouting the neighborhood." Marcus promised to pass the information along. "We'll keep an eye out," he said, "but unless he steps onto your property, there's not much we can do." Then, one day, the sedan didn't come, or the next day, or the day after that. Daniel wanted to believe it was over, that whoever he was had moved on. Lila started sleeping easier. The world seemed to balance again, briefly. But danger has a way of hiding in plain sight. It was a crisp Thursday in late October, the kind of day when the breeze smells like wood smoke and fallen leaves crunch under sneakers. Lila was playing hopscotch with her friend Maddie, a chatty girl from 2 houses down. Daniel, nursing a mild flu, watched them through the living room window, bundled in a sweater with a mug of ginger tea. When Maddie ran home to grab a forgotten toy, Lila stood waiting near the sidewalk, alone. And that's when it happened. The silver sedan appeared at the end of the block, just sitting there, engine humming. Then the driver's door opened. Victor Harlan stepped out, smiling too wide. "Hey, I remember you," he called casually. "You and your dad helped me with directions, remember?" Lila froze, because she did remember, and she remembered what her dad had said. "If you ever see that car again, you run." Lila's breath caught. She looked toward her house, just a dozen steps away, but she hesitated. Victor Harlan took one careful step forward. "Could you help me real quick? My dog's in the back seat. I think he's stuck. Poor guy keeps whining and I can't reach him." His voice was calm, concerned, kind, the kind of voice adults use to gain a child's trust. Lila glanced toward the car. The back window was tinted, dark enough that she couldn't see inside. No barking, no movement. Inside the house, Daniel had just stepped into the bathroom, the tap running. He didn't hear the voice outside. Lila bit her lip. Something didn't feel right. Her dad's warning echoed in her chest like thunder. Still, what if the dog really was hurt? She took one cautious step forward. Victor watched the street. No neighbors out. The street was still. Too still. He opened the back door of the sedan with one hand, using the other to gesture her closer. Just reach in and check his collar. You have smaller hands. Please. Lila took another half step. She leaned toward the open door. There was no dog, just dark fabric, a faint chemical smell, and an empty seat. She looked up at him, confused, and then she knew. The look on his face changed. Not a smile now, but something darker, eyes colder, jaw clenched. Before she could scream, he grabbed her arm. Her shriek was muffled by his hand, yanking her into the back seat. Her legs kicked wildly, her backpack flew off. The door slammed shut. Tires squealed. The silver sedan tore down the street, leaving nothing but skid marks and an abandoned chalk drawing on the pavement. Moments later, Maddie came jogging back, clutching a toy wand. She stopped in her tracks. The street was empty. "Lila," she called, voice rising. She spotted the backpack, lying open, crayons scattered like fallen leaves. Maddie screamed. Daniel came running, spilling his tea, tripping over the porch steps. His heart plummeted, because where his daughter had just been, there was now only silence, and the growing scream of sirens that would soon fill their block like a storm rolling in from nowhere. By the time Mara arrived home, the front yard was lit with flashing red and blue. She hadn't even parked the car before bolting out, her nurse's scrubs wrinkled, her face pale. She found Daniel in the driveway, clutching the porch railing like it was the only thing keeping him upright. "She's gone," he choked. He took her. The man in the car. I was inside." Mara's knees buckled. Her scream was sharp, raw, guttural. Daniel caught her before she collapsed completely, and they stood trembling in each other's arms, swallowed by sirens, and the chaos unraveling around them. Inside the house, the living room had transformed into a command center. Maps, photos, and checklists began covering the dining table. Uniformed officers buzzed through every corner of the house, radio chatter overlapping with weeping. Detective Nyla Green, lead investigator on child abduction cases, took command. With her tightly braided hair and clipped tone, she moved like someone who had chased nightmares before. She reviewed statements from Daniel and Maddie, both shaken. Suspect is male, mid-40s, brown hair, slim build. Vehicle, late model silver sedan, partial plate, no visible dog, she reported into her headset. Officers fanned out across the neighborhood. Drones were deployed. A code amber alert pinged across every phone in the county. Still, minutes crawled by. No sightings, no leads. Daniel paced near the fireplace, rage boiling beneath the guilt. "I should have stopped him," he growled to Detective Green. "I knew something was off weeks ago. I should have." "You were being a father," she replied flatly. "Now be one again. We need you focused." The phone rang. Every head turned. Daniel lunged for it, but it wasn't Lila, just a tip from someone who thought they saw the car near the old freight yard. Officers were dispatched instantly. Hour after hour passed. Neighbors arrived with blankets, candles, and food no one could eat. Mara sat on the couch, rocking slightly, clutching a tiny sweater Lila had outgrown. Her hands trembled. Daniel stood by the front window, eyes scanning the street like he could will his daughter back. But outside, the night stretched on, vast, silent, and merciless. And somewhere out there, Lila was alone in the dark, while her parents began the longest wait of their lives. By dawn, even the strongest voices had grown hoarse. Flashlights dimmed. Coffee went cold. The search parties, made up of volunteers, deputies, even retired firefighters, combed through abandoned warehouses and wooded trails. No one found anything. Not yet. Inside the Thompson home, time moved like syrup. Mara sat curled on the couch, her arms wrapped around a pillow like it was her daughter. Her eyes were open, but her thoughts were distant. Daniel hadn't slept. He paced from window to window, phone in hand, checking and rechecking updates from Detective Green. Then, as the clock hit the 13th hour, it rang. Daniel nearly dropped the phone in his scramble to answer. Yes. An officer spoke quickly on the line. Possible sighting of the vehicle near the abandoned lumber mill outside town. Units en route. Daniel's voice broke as he relayed the news to Mara. Detective Green didn't wait. She grabbed her coat and was out the door in under a minute. Daniel and Mara followed, escorted by a patrol car. They arrived to the lumber yard as flashing lights painted the gravel in swirls of red. Yellow tape fluttered in the wind. Officers were everywhere, and at the center of it, the silver sedan. The back door was ajar. Inside, huddled under a tattered blanket, eyes wide and hollow, was Lila. She didn't move when they called her name, only blinked. But she was alive. Victor Harlan was gone, fled on foot when he spotted the first cruiser. A manhunt swept into the forested hillside, but the priority now was the child. An officer lifted her carefully. She flinched, but didn't fight. Her tiny hands were ice. At Mercy County General, doctors checked for injuries. No major wounds, a bruise on her arm, scratches. But the real damage was deeper. Mara clutched her daughter in the hospital bed, tears sliding into Lila's curls. Daniel stood guard like a sentinel, his face stone. Still, Lila didn't speak, not a word. She blinked, she trembled, but she said nothing. Doctors said it could be trauma. That silence was sometimes a survival tool. And as night fell again, the Thompson family found themselves grateful and terrified. Grateful she was back. Terrified of everything that might never come back with her. The days after Lila's return passed like a slow-moving dream, heavy with relief, but laced with dread. She was home, but not whole. She didn't speak, didn't laugh, didn't hum silly tunes under her breath like she once did. Her once colorful drawings sat untouched in a drawer. Every creak in the house made her flinch. Every closed door made her eyes dart. Mara tried to keep routines. She read aloud during bedtime, even if Lila stared blankly at the wall. Daniel built a custom lock for every window, checking them 3 times before bed. Still, no one truly slept. Lila's eyes carried a question no one could answer. Is he coming back? Therapists came and went, some gentle, some clinical, all hopeful. None of them cracked her silence. Then, during one session at a trauma clinic in neighboring Glenmere, a therapist named Dr. Asha Malik offered something different. He's waiting for you, Dr. Malik said softly. In the next room. I think you two might understand each other. Mara hesitated. Who's waiting? His name is Echo. Lila's brow furrowed. Not fear, curiosity. They stepped into a room with padded floors, soft pastel lighting, and no windows. There, sitting tall and still beside a basket of toys, was a large Belgian Malinois. A thick scar curled along his left flank, where fur refused to grow. His eyes locked onto Lila's the moment she entered. He didn't move, didn't bark, just watched, alert, but calm. Lila took one step inside. Echo wagged his tail, once. Dr. Malik spoke gently. He's a retired search dog, was injured on his last mission. Knife wound. His old handler said he stopped barking after that. Not fear, just quiet strength. Lila stared. Mara barely breathed. After a long pause, Lila stepped closer and reached out a trembling hand. Echo met it halfway, pressing his muzzle softly into her fingers. A flicker of something passed across Lila's face. Recognition, not of the dog, of herself, of pain, of survival, and as her hand rested on his scar, she didn't pull away. Because for the first time since that terrible day, she had found something that didn't demand words. Just presence, just understanding, just quiet. Dr. Malik knelt beside the silent girl and her canine companion. Lila, would it be okay if Echo sat with you for a while? Lila didn't answer, but she didn't step away either. That was enough. Echo lay down beside her on the padded mat, his scar exposed under the soft light. Lila crouched next to him, her fingers hovering above the rough patch along his side. Then slowly, she touched it. The texture startled her. Not because it was ugly, but because it felt real, familiar, like something that belonged on someone who had seen danger and come back changed. Dr. Malik watched in silence. This dog, she later told Mara and Daniel, has helped other children like Lila. There's something about him, a kind of emotional radar. Mara looked at her daughter through the glass, sitting beside Echo with a stillness that hadn't been there in weeks. You think it's safe? Daniel asked. He's big. He's trained for protection, yes, but he's also trained for stillness. He reads people better than most humans I know. From that day on, Lila's sessions included Echo. Sometimes they played quiet games, rolling a soft ball or simply laying side by side. Other times, Lila would curl up next to him and trace his scar over and over, like reading a secret map. Dr. Malik began noticing changes. Lila didn't flinch at footsteps anymore. She no longer avoided eye contact. And one afternoon, when Mara arrived early for pickup, she witnessed something that made her knees nearly give out. Lila was sitting with Echo, holding a small ring toy in her lap. Dr. Malik had guided her to raise her hand. Echo responded instantly, trotting over and retrieving the toy with gentle precision. Lila let out a soft, breathy sound, not quite a laugh, but almost. Mara pressed her hand to her heart, blinking back tears. The bond was working. It wasn't speech, not yet, but it was communication. Echo understood Lila's silent world because he too lived in it, a place where scars didn't need explanation. And as days turned into weeks, the girl who wouldn't speak and the dog who wouldn't bark began writing their own language, one that didn't need words, just trust. Weeks passed, and Lila's world grew quieter. Not in the way it had been, filled with shadows and fear. No, this silence was different. It was softer, more filled with peace. She started spending more time with Echo, on the porch, in the garden, in the living room, where sunlight streamed through the windows, casting long golden beams across the floor. They were together constantly, an inseparable pair. Echo lay at her feet when she read, his eyes half closed in contentment. He trotted beside her when she wandered outside to watch the clouds, and stayed close when she played with the stuffed animals that once lined her bed. Mara watched it all, a bittersweet smile tugging at her lips. There were days when she almost didn't notice how much Lila had changed. Almost. But then, she'd catch a glimpse. Lila's eyes, softer now, brighter. A glimmer of something that had been buried beneath layers of trauma. Sometimes, Lila would give Echo a gentle tap on the head, a small gesture of affection. And then there were the moments that truly took Mara's breath away. It was an ordinary Thursday afternoon. Daniel was fixing a doorframe in the kitchen, and Mara was sorting through mail on the porch. The sound of Echo's low growl caught her attention. She turned just in time to see Lila, standing still in the front yard, her gaze fixed on something, or rather, someone. Mara's heart stilled as she followed her daughter's gaze. A car, the same silver sedan that had terrorized their lives. It was parked at the end of the street, its engine silent. Lila's hand tightened around the leash, her face unreadable. Echo didn't move, but his eyes were fixed on the car, unwavering. Mara's stomach turned. It wasn't Victor this time, but the memories still lingered. The sight of that car, its driver, the unspoken threat that followed. Lila? Mara's voice cracked through the silence. Lila didn't respond, but her eyes, the calm that had been there moments ago, shifted. Echo's growl deepened, quiet but unmistakable. Then, before Mara could speak again, Lila raised her hand, pointing slowly toward the car. It wasn't a shout. It wasn't even a word. But it was a signal. Echo stepped forward, his body rigid. He stood between Lila and the car, growling softly, his form protective. His stance said everything. Stay back. Mara's breath caught in her throat as she watched Lila. The girl hadn't spoken a word, but her eyes locked with her mother's. And in that silent exchange, Mara knew. Layla wasn't just watching the car. She was acknowledging the threat, one that Echo had already recognized. A shiver ran down Mara's spine, but the car didn't move. It stayed there, and after a long, tense moment, it pulled away. Slowly, cautiously. Leela didn't flinch. She didn't turn away. For the first time, Mara saw her daughter face the fear and hold it at bay. And for the first time, Mara realized that the silence between them wasn't empty anymore. It had meaning. After the car incident, things changed. Lila became more confident. She didn't speak, not in words anyway, but she communicated in ways Mara had never imagined. A tap of her hand to Echo's side meant it was time to play. A small, deliberate gesture pointed toward the door when she wanted to go outside. And for the first time in months, there were moments when Lila would hum. Just a soft, tuneless melody that carried through the house. Mara watched it all with cautious hope. Each small victory felt monumental, but deep down, she knew the real test was still to come. The trial. It loomed over them, an unavoidable storm on the horizon. Victor Harlan had been caught, but his trial was fast approaching. Mara and Daniel had prepared themselves as best as they could. Therapy, courtroom familiarization, assurances from their lawyer, Clara Wu, that everything would be done to protect Lila. Still, the idea of facing the man who had taken so much from their family terrified them both. And Lila? The thought of her stepping into a courtroom, even with Echo by her side, was enough to leave Mara breathless. Yet, Lila wasn't afraid. The weeks leading up to the trial saw her grow more certain in her movements, more steady. It was as if Echo was showing her the way, not through grand gestures, but through his quiet presence. The therapy dog who had once been a stranger had become her most trusted ally, and the bond they shared was undeniable. On the morning of the trial, Lila woke early. Mara found her sitting in the living room, her eyes fixed on Echo, who lay curled at her feet. There was something different about her today. It wasn't the quiet calm of the past weeks. No, this was something new. Lila's small hand reached down and gently scratched behind Echo's ears. "I'm ready," Lila whispered to him, though no one else could hear. Mara froze in the doorway, her heart hammering in her chest. "Ready?" Lila looked up, her expression calm and steady. For a moment, the world felt still, as if time had slowed to a crawl. Then, Lila turned toward her mother. Her lips parted, and for the first time in what felt like forever, a single word escaped her. Mom. Mara's breath caught in her throat. It was soft, tentative, but it was a word that had been missing for so long. Tears welled up in Mara's eyes. She didn't speak, didn't ask if she was okay, didn't say anything at all. Instead, she walked forward, knelt beside her daughter, and wrapped her arms around her. And for the first time in a year, Lila didn't pull away. She buried her face in Mara's chest, whispering only one thing. I'm ready, Mom. I can do this. And in that moment, Mara understood. This trial, this moment, wasn't just about facing Victor Harlan. It was about Lila's courage. A courage that had been hidden for far too long, but had now found its way to the surface. The courthouse was a place of contradictions. It was cold and sterile, but it also felt alive with the weight of the moment. The air inside was thick with anticipation, with the eyes of the entire room fixed on Lila and Echo. As they stepped through the double doors, Mara couldn't help but feel a rush of emotions, fear, hope, and a sense of resolve. Lila didn't look up at her mother. She didn't need to. Echo was by her side, his steady presence a shield against the world. The dog's calm demeanor was contagious, and for a moment, Mara thought she saw a flicker of strength in Lila's eyes. They were escorted to a small private chamber, where they would wait before the trial began. Clara Wu, their lawyer, gave them an encouraging smile, though there was no hiding the anxiety that tugged at the corners of her eyes. She knew how difficult this was for Lila. She knew what was at stake. Outside the room, the sounds of the trial began, voices rising and falling, the occasional clink of the gavel. It was a familiar rhythm, one that felt foreign and threatening all at once. And then, it was time. Lila, we're ready for you, Clara said softly, her voice laced with sympathy. Lila didn't hesitate. She stood up, Echo rising with her as if sensing the shift in energy. With a gentle tug on the leash, she led him toward the door. Mara followed, her heart racing. But she couldn't help but admire the way Lila walked. There was a grace to her movements now, an unspoken confidence. The silent bond between her and Echo was unbreakable. The doors to the courtroom opened with a low creak, and the weight of the moment slammed into Mara like a wave. The room was filled with eyes, all fixed on Lila. There were reporters, lawyers, the judge, and even Victor Harlan, sitting at the defense table with a cold, unreadable expression. But Lila didn't flinch. She didn't look away. She only moved forward, Echo at her side, his steady presence unwavering. As Mara followed behind, she saw it. Lila's small hand, trembling only slightly, reached down and gently touched Echo's fur. The gesture was silent, but powerful. A message to everyone watching. I am here, and I am ready. Judge Roberta Castillo looked down at them, her eyes filled with compassion. She knew this would be no ordinary trial, and yet, in this moment, she saw something that transcended words, a child's courage and a dog's loyalty. The room went silent as Lila took her seat beside Clara, Echo sitting calmly at her feet. And in that silence, Lila knew she had already won, no matter what happened next. The courtroom was eerily quiet as everyone waited. The air seemed thick, laden with the weight of what was about to happen. Lila sat at the prosecutor's table, her back straight, her fingers lightly gripping Echo's leash. The dog, as always, remained still, his sharp eyes watching everything with an almost human understanding. Across the room, Victor Harlan sat at the defense table, his jaw clenched, his eyes fixed on the small figure beside the dog. He had already dismissed Lila as a threat, a child too broken to speak. But there was something in the way. Echo sat by her side, the calm that radiated from him, that made the defense's confidence waver. It was time. Prosecutor Nadia Ahmed stood, her voice steady as she addressed the judge. Your Honor, we are prepared to proceed. The child witness, Lila Thompson, will not be testifying in the traditional manner, but we respectfully request that she be allowed to demonstrate her recognition of the defendant, Victor Harlan, through a nonverbal signal. The room held its breath. The defense attorney, Anthony Madsen, stood up with a sneer. Objection, Your Honor. This is highly irregular. We are dealing with a child who has not spoken in over a year. How can we trust her to accurately identify anyone? Judge Roberta Castillo's gaze was unwavering as she spoke, her voice calm but firm. Ms. Ahmed, proceed. Mr. Madsen, sit down. This court has already granted special accommodations for the child's testimony. Let's move forward. With that, Nadia motioned to Lila. The young girl stood, her legs slightly shaking, but her posture remained resolute. Echo stood with her, as if sensing the gravity of the moment. He didn't bark or growl. He simply stood, silent and unwavering. Mara watched her daughter from the gallery, her breath caught in her throat. She had seen Lila's courage before, but this was different. This was the moment when everything would change. Lila stepped forward slowly, her eyes scanning the courtroom. The space was filled with faces, strangers, lawyers, reporters. But her gaze was fixed on only one person. She looked toward Victor Harlan, her expression unreadable. And in the stillness, she raised her hand. A small, almost imperceptible gesture. Echo reacted immediately. With a deep rumbling growl, the dog stepped forward, his body tense, his gaze fixed solely on Harlan. The courtroom exploded into a buzz of whispers, but Lila remained silent. She didn't need to say a word. Her signal, simple, clear, had done everything it needed to do. Victor Harlan's face paled, his eyes widening in disbelief. He opened his mouth as if to speak, but no words came out. His hands clenched into fists at his sides. It was over. The truth had been revealed, not in a shout or a cry, but in a single, silent act. The courtroom was alive with tension. But for Lila, it had all fallen silent. She sat still, her small form almost swallowed by the chair, her fingers lightly clutching Echo's leash. The dog, his eyes unblinking, stood resolutely beside her, the one constant in a world that had been anything but stable. Judge Roberta Castillo lifted her gavel, striking it with a sharp crack that seemed to echo across the room. "Order in the court," she called. The noise settled quickly, but the weight of the moment lingered in the air. Across the room, Victor Harlan shifted uncomfortably in his seat. His earlier composure was gone, replaced by something darker, something closer to fear. He could feel the eyes of the courtroom on him, the evidence, the testimony, and now Lila's silent signal had turned the tide against him. He had hoped for a defense, a crack in the case, but it had all fallen apart in one gesture. Nadia Ahmed, the prosecutor, turned to face the jury, her voice unwavering. "Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, what you have seen today is not just a demonstration of courage from a young child. It is a truth that cannot be denied. Lila Thompson has identified Victor Harlan as the man who took her from her home, and that identification is backed by the silent language she shares with her therapy dog, Echo." Her words were simple, but they hung in the air with the weight of undeniable truth. Nadia turned back to the judge. "We have established the connection between the defendant and the child. We ask the court to proceed with sentencing." The room seemed to hold its breath as Anthony Madsen, Harlan's defense attorney, jumped to his feet. "Your Honor, this entire procedure is an affront to justice. You cannot allow a child's silent gesture to be the sole evidence used to convict my client. There are no spoken words, no concrete testimony." But Judge Castillo remained calm, her eyes locked onto the defense lawyer. "Mr. Madsen, I have heard your objections, but the facts stand. We will proceed with sentencing. Victor Harlan, you have been found guilty of attempted abduction, child endangerment, and assault. The evidence is overwhelming." Harlan opened his mouth, but no words came. His eyes shifted from the judge to the jury, to Lila, and finally, to Echo. His world was crumbling. The walls that had once shielded him were collapsing. And there, in that moment, a deep, quiet understanding passed between him and Echo. A dog who had seen his crimes without ever needing to speak. The gavel fell. "This court is adjourned." The courthouse slowly emptied. But Lila and Echo remained seated for a long time after the verdict. The noise, the tension, the murmurs of the crowd had become background static. In her hands, the leash felt warm and familiar. Echo hadn't moved. He sat at her side, alert but calm. Mara finally stepped forward, tears in her eyes as she knelt beside them. She didn't speak. She just wrapped an arm around Lila's shoulders, pulling her close. Lila leaned in quietly, not with fear, but with a quiet exhaustion, the kind that comes after a storm has passed. Judge Castillo approached slowly from the bench. It was unusual, but this case hadn't been typical in any way. Her expression had softened. "You were brave today," she said gently to Lila. "Braver than most adults I've seen walk through these doors." Lila didn't speak. She didn't have to. Her hand reached out and rested on Echo's head. That gesture alone told the judge everything. In the following days, the courtroom moment made national headlines. Child's silent signal brings justice. Media outlets scrambled for interviews, but the Thompsons refused. There would be no press conference, no spotlight, just healing. And healing wasn't immediate. At home, Lila still awoke from nightmares. Some nights she would sit by the window, knees tucked under her chin, staring into the quiet street. Echo would sit beside her, their silhouettes framed by the moonlight. Sometimes they stayed like that for hours, silent, but not alone. Daniel took time off work to be home. He repaired the front gate, replaced the cracked tiles in the bathroom. But more than that, he was present, always nearby, always available. He'd often sit across from Lila while she painted or sorted through old puzzle pieces. Mara focused on giving Lila choices, small ones at first, blue shirt or green, apples or crackers. She encouraged Lila to find her voice at her own pace. And then, one morning, something changed. Lila was brushing Echo's fur in the backyard when she stopped suddenly, staring into the distance. Mara stepped outside, her voice hesitant. "Sweetheart, you okay?" Lila turned, lips parting, and though the words didn't come out loud, her eyes said yes. She was okay. She was still healing, but she wasn't afraid anymore. Spring crept in quietly. The days stretched longer. The air felt lighter, and for the first time in nearly a year, laughter, small and rare, returned to the Thompson household. Lila still wasn't speaking regularly, but she was humming again. Echo stayed near her side, even when she slept. They'd curl up together in her room, the dog's body curved protectively at her feet. Each night, when Mara peeked in, she saw them, girl and guardian, asleep in a shared world of safety. But safety, she knew, was always fragile. One afternoon, as birds chirped beyond the window, a knock came at the door. Daniel opened it, greeted by a uniformed courier holding a large envelope. He signed for it, thanked the man, and slowly closed the door. There was a strange weight in the air as he stared down at the envelope. Court seal. He called Mara to the kitchen and opened it with trembling fingers. Inside, a formal notice. Summons for court testimony in State v. Harlan. Sentencing phase. Attached was a note from Clara Wu, their attorney, written in her careful hand. If Lila is willing, her presence could help the judge determine the final sentence. We understand if it's too much, but the court is offering her a voice, even if spoken through gesture. Daniel and Mara exchanged glances, no words, just the shared knowledge that something important had returned. The question, should we ask her to do this? That evening they sat beside Lila on the porch, Echo resting near her feet. Mara held the letter loosely, her voice soft. Lila, they want to know if you'd be willing to come back. One more time, just to help them make sure he never hurts anyone again. Lila didn't answer right away, but she looked at Echo. Then she reached into her pocket and pulled out something small, a folded piece of paper she'd drawn earlier that week. It showed a courtroom, a little girl, a dog, and a cage. She handed it to her parents without a word. Mara's breath caught. Daniel blinked hard. No. Lila hadn't said yes, but she hadn't said no either. And the drawing? It was more than enough. The courthouse looked the same. Cold marble floors, solemn portraits, and that same sterile hum in the air. But something was different. Lila wasn't the same girl who had walked these halls months before. This time, she didn't shrink behind her parents. She didn't hesitate near the security gates or flinch at the metal detector beep. Echo walked beside her, ears high, tail steady. He didn't need a command. He knew why they were here. Clara Wu greeted them in a quiet room off to the side. She smiled, but her tone was careful. The sentencing hearing is informal. The judge will ask if Lila wants to express anything. She can nod, or even use her drawings. And of course, Echo stays with her. Mara knelt to adjust the strap on Lila's vest. If you don't want to say or show anything, that's okay, she whispered. We're already proud of you. Lila gave a soft nod, not eager, not afraid, just ready. They entered the courtroom just before the judge arrived. Victor Harlan was already seated, flanked by guards. His suit looked rumpled this time, his hands cuffed. His face betrayed nothing, but his eyes flicked briefly, warily, to Lila. She didn't flinch. Judge Roberta Castillo stepped up to the bench, her expression somber but warm. We reconvene today to finalize sentencing. The victim has requested to speak or demonstrate something on her behalf. All eyes turned to Lila. She stood slowly. Echo rose with her. Clara handed the girl a single sheet of paper. Lila walked forward, her steps small but sure. She approached the bench and held up her drawing. It showed a house with a dark figure outside the window, and a little girl curled up with a dog inside, safe. Then, without looking at Harlan, Lila gave Echo the smallest flick of her fingers. Echo growled, not loud, not dramatic, but clear. Judge Castillo watched, her lips pressed together. Thank you, Lila, she said gently. That was more powerful than any testimony. She turned to Harlan, her tone sharpened. For the record, this court sentences you to the maximum term allowable. You are a threat to children, to safety, to everything this community stands for. The gavel struck. It was done. But for Lila and Echo, this wasn't justice. It was closure, and they had claimed it, together. The news spread faster than anyone expected. Little girl's silent signal sends predator to prison. Therapy dog helps deliver justice in landmark trial. Though the Thompson family kept to themselves, the world outside was buzzing. Reporters camped out near the courthouse. Mental health experts debated the impact of trauma communication. Animal advocates praised Echo's role as a breakthrough in child protection. But inside their quiet home on Willow Creek Drive, none of that mattered. What mattered was the drawing now framed on the mantel, the one Lila had shown the judge. What mattered was Echo still sleeping beside Lila's bed each night, ears twitching at distant sounds, as if still on duty. The trial had ended, but healing hadn't. Sometimes at breakfast, Lila would stare into space for long stretches. Sometimes she wouldn't respond when called. Mara and Daniel had learned not to push. Instead, they stayed close, patient, present. Echo remained Lila's emotional compass. If she was restless, he followed her through every room. If she froze from a nightmare, he nuzzled her hand until she blinked back into the present. And slowly, very slowly, Lila began to resurface. One afternoon, Mara found her in the backyard, sitting with Echo beneath the old oak tree. Lila had a spiral notebook open on her lap, a pencil tucked behind one ear. "What are you drawing, sweetheart?" Lila looked up, blinking once. Then she turned the notebook around. It was a scene, a row of children sitting on a floor, all looking at Echo, who was mid-spin, tail up, tongue out. Lila was standing nearby, smiling. Mara tilted her head. "Is this a classroom?" Lila gave a tiny nod. The image was clear. Lila wanted to share Echo with others, not for attention, not for therapy, but because she knew what it felt like to need someone like him and have no one. Mara knelt beside her, trying to keep her voice steady. "Do you want to show him to other kids?" Lila's hand slid onto Echo's fur. Her eyes brightened. Then, a whisper. "Some kids don't have Echo," she said. "Maybe he can help." The words weren't loud, but they were hers. And in them was purpose. The idea started as a sketch. But sketches have power when drawn by someone who's been through the dark. Mara didn't question it. The next morning she made calls. To the therapist, to the local community center, even to Dr. Malik at the hospital. Within a week, she and Daniel were seated across from a panel of school counselors and trauma specialists. At their feet, Echo lay calmly, his head on his paws, like he already knew this meeting was about him. Dr. Malik smiled at Lila, seated quietly beside her mom. "Would you like to explain your idea?" Lila hesitated, then handed over her newest drawing. It showed a schoolroom, bright windows, beanbags in a reading corner, and children sitting in a circle. In the middle stood Echo. Beside him, a little girl with short hair and a small smile. Lila didn't need words. The picture said everything. "She wants Echo to visit kids," Mara added softly, "ones like her, who've been through hard things, who maybe don't want to talk yet, but still want to feel safe." There was silence in the room, the kind that follows something both simple and profound. "Echo's already certified," Dr. Malik said. "His record speaks for itself. If we supervise visits, and if Lila's comfortable joining, this could be groundbreaking." Daniel glanced at his daughter. "You sure, sweetie?" Lila nodded, not quickly, not dramatically, but with a calm certainty that spoke louder than any speech. Plans were drawn, schedules made, and 1 month later, Lila and Echo walked into their first school library, a soft-colored room filled with plush rugs and nervous children. Many of them wouldn't speak. Some hid behind chairs. Some flinched when doors shut too hard. But Lila understood. So did Echo. The dog sat in the center, his gaze steady, and Lila, without prompting, took a seat beside him. She didn't speak. She simply held up a sign she'd made herself. "You don't have to talk." Echo listens anyway. A small boy, maybe 6, slid forward first, sitting cross-legged just a few feet away. Then another girl. Then a third. And just like that, a circle began to form. Not one made of words, but of trust and fur. Every Tuesday afternoon the circle grew. What started with a handful of quiet children sitting near Echo slowly became something bigger, something almost sacred. It wasn't therapy, not exactly. It wasn't playtime either. It was a space, a safe space. And Lila? She never stood at the front. She never led the group or read books aloud. But she always sat in the same spot, right beside Echo, arms wrapped gently around his neck. Sometimes she brought her sketchbook. Sometimes she brought soft clay and let the other kids mold shapes while Echo snoozed in the middle. No one had to explain what they were feeling. It was understood. One day, a girl named Hazel came in late. She was small, barely 5, her eyes wide and guarded. She didn't speak. She didn't sit. She stood frozen in the doorway, clutching the sleeve of her oversized hoodie. Lila noticed first. She didn't wave or call out. She simply held out a soft green ball, one of Echo's favorites. Hazel stared. Then Echo stood, walked slowly over, and dropped the ball at her feet. The girl blinked, then dropped to her knees and began to cry. Soft, breathless sobs. Echo didn't move. He just rested his head on her shoulder, tail thumping gently. No adult in the room said a word. They didn't need to. Later, Lila added a new drawing to her collection. A small girl and a dog, surrounded by quiet stars. On the bottom, she wrote one word in blocky, uneven letters. Belong. Mara kept each drawing in a growing folder. One night, she opened it alone, flipping through the scenes. Courtrooms, classrooms, children. Echo always in the center. In each one, Lila had left a clue, a silent record of every heart Echo had helped soften. And Lila herself. She smiled more now. She still didn't talk much, but her eyes danced when she drew. When a bird landed near the windowsill, she whispered, "Hi." When she stubbed her toe, she muttered, "Ow." And one evening, while brushing Echo before bed, she looked up at Mara and asked quietly, "Do you think Echo remembers every kid?" Mara blinked, heart full. "I think Echo remembers the ones who need remembering." "And Lila?" She nodded, because she remembered them too. One rainy afternoon, while sorting through the mail, Daniel found a cream-colored envelope addressed in careful cursive. To Lila Thompson. No return address. He handed it to Mara, who turned it over curiously, then called to Lila, who was upstairs sketching. When Lila opened the envelope, a single folded page and a small photograph fell into her lap. The photo showed a young woman in a hospital bed, smiling weakly, her arm wrapped around a small girl with tangled hair and wide, tear-streaked eyes. Beside the girl sat Echo, his nose resting on her leg. Lila's breath caught. She remembered that day. Barely. The girl, Hazel, had stopped coming to the school circle after that visit. No one had explained why. Lila had assumed she'd moved or just disappeared. Then she unfolded the letter. "Dear Lila, you don't know me, but I'm Hazel's mom. I was very sick when Hazel started coming to your group. She didn't talk to anyone. She hardly looked up. But after sitting with Echo, she came home and curled beside me and whispered, 'I touched a dog.' It was the first full sentence I'd heard in months. Hazel said Echo didn't care that she cried. Said you didn't either. That you just let her sit there and be her. That mattered more than anything. I want you to know something. Hazel's different now, stronger. She paints. She's made 2 friends, and she talks about you all the time. The girl with the quiet dog who understands. You saved her. Thank you. Love, Emma, Hazel's mom." Lila's hands trembled slightly as she set the letter down. For a long while, she didn't say anything. She just stared at the picture, her fingers tracing Echo's face in it. Then she turned to Mara and said quietly, "Can I put this on my wall?" Mara nodded, voice caught in her throat. "Of course, honey." That night, Lila taped the photo and letter beside her drawings. Above them, she scribbled in colorful marker, "This is why." And in that quiet room, under the hum of rain and the soft breathing of a sleeping dog, Lila smiled. Because now, she had a reason, not just to heal, but to give healing back. A few weeks later, a call came from Dr. Malik. Would Lila and Echo be willing to attend a conference? He asked. It's local, a panel on trauma recovery. Nothing formal, just a story. Her story. Mara hesitated. She'd seen how far Lila had come, but crowds, microphones, spotlights. She doesn't speak much, Mara warned. She doesn't need to, Malik replied. She's already said more through silence than most do with speeches. They left the decision to Lila. That evening, seated cross-legged on her bedroom rug, Lila listened as Mara explained. Her face was unreadable, not afraid, not thrilled, just thoughtful. Finally, she spoke. Will there be other kids? Mara nodded. Some teens, some parents, some teachers, all people who care about helping. Lila looked at Echo. He gave a small huff, resting his chin on her knee. Then she asked, Can I bring my pictures? Mara smiled. As many as you want. The night of the event, the conference room was warm and full of quiet chatter. A small table had been set up at the side, easels displaying Lila's drawings. Each one had a sticky note with a single word. Afraid. Alone. Heard. Safe. Lila sat near the display, Echo curled beside her. She wore a dark green hoodie, her sketchbook tucked protectively under her arm. When the panel began, Dr. Malik spoke first, then a teacher, then a parent, and then, softly, he introduced her. She won't speak today, he told the audience, but she brought something better. Lila stood, walked to the microphone with steady steps, and gently placed one drawing on the stand. It showed Echo in the middle of a crowd of kids, some laughing, some crying, all touching him. She stepped back. The room fell still. And then, slow, rising applause. People didn't clap like at a concert. They clapped like something sacred had just happened. Something honest. Later, a teenage boy approached her, face red, voice shaking. My sister doesn't talk either, but your dog? I think he'd make her smile. Lila looked up. She tore a blank page from her sketchbook, drew a quick heart with 4 paws underneath, then handed it to him. No words. But again, none were needed. As spring melted into summer, Lila's folder of drawings grew so thick it could barely close. One day, while organizing them with Mara, she paused mid-stack and whispered, I want to make a book. Mara looked up. A storybook? Lila nodded, flipping to a page she'd drawn weeks ago, Echo sitting by a crying girl, a soft caption underneath. He doesn't need you to smile. He just needs you to stay. From that, a new project began. They called it the Paw Print Book. Each page was one of Lila's drawings, each with a single line she wrote herself. No long paragraphs, just small truths from a quiet soul. Pages that read, Some feelings are too big for words. Echo doesn't fix things. He just holds them. Sometimes being brave looks like showing up. Daniel scanned the pages and helped format them. Mara contacted a local printer who offered to donate the first run. Lila designed the cover, a soft silhouette of Echo under a starlit sky, a small girl beside him, both looking forward. The title, in her uneven but heartfelt writing, wrapped around them in pale blue ink. When the first copy arrived, still warm from the press, Lila held it like a newborn. She didn't say anything for a long time. Then she whispered, "Do you think kids will read it?" Mara smiled. "I think kids will feel it, and that's more important." They donated the first 50 copies to trauma centers, school counselors, and foster programs. Responses flooded in. A therapist in Ohio said it helped a nonverbal child point to how she felt. A foster mom in Oregon wrote that her daughter slept with it under her pillow. Even a librarian in Maine asked if Lila would consider making a sequel. Lila didn't say yes. She just opened her sketchbook and drew 2 figures, walking into a sunrise. The girl slightly taller now, Echo still beside her. When Echo passed her the green ball later that night, she smiled and said, "Not yet, but maybe soon." The book didn't make her famous. It made her heard. And that, at last, was enough. One August night, a storm rolled in. Not just rain, but a full roar of thunder and flickering sky. It rattled windows and shook tree branches loose. Lila sat by her bedroom window, Echo curled tight at her feet. Normally, storms didn't bother her anymore. But tonight, something in the wind felt different. Mara entered softly with a flashlight and a blanket. "Power might go out. You okay?" Lila nodded, but Echo didn't move. His head was up, his ears alert, and when the lightning cracked again, he whimpered, just once. That was rare. She reached to comfort him, but he shifted away, nose twitching. His breathing quickened. By morning, the storm was gone. But Echo wasn't the same. He moved slower, ate less, slept longer. They took him to Dr. Ramirez, the vet who'd known him since the shelter days. After a long silence and gentle touch, the vet sighed. "He's aging faster than expected. Maybe his work wore him more than we knew." Mara's voice broke. "Is there anything we can do?" "Make him comfortable, Dr. Ramirez said, "and let him do what he loves. Be with her." So they did. For the next few weeks, Lila and Echo were inseparable again. Not just emotionally, but completely. They napped under trees, made more drawings, and even visited a few more classrooms. One morning, while brushing Echo's coat in the backyard, Lila whispered, "You're tired, huh?" Echo blinked slowly as if to say, "I'm okay. I'm here." And then she reached into her pocket and pulled out a small velvet pouch. Inside it was a metal tag, engraved with wobbly lines and misspelled letters. It read, "Best Listener." She clipped it to his collar, her hands steady. "You earned this," she said. "You earned all of it." Later that day, Echo curled beside her as usual, but when Mara peeked in that night, the girl was awake, silent, her hand resting gently on his still side. There were no tears, just a drawing on her nightstand. It showed a girl holding a leash, standing in a field of stars. The leash extended into the sky, to a dog watching from above, and beneath it, one word: always. Echo's passing was quiet, peaceful. No last bark, no dramatic farewell, just one long exhale beside Lila, and then stillness. The house felt different afterward. Not empty. Echo had never been a loud dog, but quieter than quiet, as if something sacred had been gently lifted from its place. Lila didn't cry much. She didn't have to. Her grief lived in her drawings. She filled pages with skies and stars, with leashes that reached beyond clouds, with paw prints pressed into sand that disappeared just before the ocean. One morning, Daniel found her in the garage, rummaging through old boxes. "What are you looking for?" he asked. She held up an old wooden crate labeled ECHO. Inside were his puppy photos, Early vet records, the green ball, his therapy vest, and at the very bottom, a tiny cloth notebook. Blank, except for the cover. She held it up. In faded marker, it read, Echo's Book 2. Daniel blinked. I didn't know you made a second one. Lila shrugged. I didn't finish it. I was waiting. That afternoon, she sat at the kitchen table, pencil in hand. But she didn't draw right away. Instead, she wrote, Echo isn't gone. He just walks softer now. Sometimes, I still feel him beside me. When I'm scared, I pretend he's growling just loud enough for me to be brave. She paused, then added a sketch. Her classroom full of kids. A space in the middle, empty but glowing. Echo's spot. And then something changed. The next week, Lila returned to the school group. At first, the kids looked confused. One of them asked, Where's Echo? Lila knelt down and said, for the first time in front of all of them, loud enough to be heard, He's here. She tapped her heart, and then pulled out a stuffed animal, a soft German shepherd toy, with Echo's same eyes, same posture. She set it gently in the middle of the circle. We're gonna draw Echo today, she said. The kids lit up. And Lila, she smiled, fully, openly, because some dogs never leave, they just echo. Weeks passed, the seasons shifted, the world outside moved forward, as it always does. But Lila's world still revolved around Echo, not in sadness, but in gratitude. She began volunteering at the local shelter with Mara every Saturday. At first, she just helped clean bowls and refill water. But soon, she was reading books aloud in the kennels. Dogs that barked non-stop would go quiet when she sat down. Some would press their bodies to the metal bars just to get closer. And then, one afternoon, she saw him. A scruffy, wiry mutt with uneven ears and wild yellow eyes. He sat at the back of his cage, not barking, just watching. Lila crouched low and tilted her head. The dog tilted his back. No growl, no wag, just curiosity. She opened the kennel slowly. He didn't move. But when she sat down, cross-legged, he crept forward and rested his chin on her knee. Mara, standing nearby, whispered, You feel something? Lila nodded. Not like Echo, but something. They visited him every week. His name, according to the intake form, was Toby. Found wandering near a highway, scars on his back legs, fear of loud noises, trust issues. Lila understood all of it. Weeks turned to a month. Then came the question. You thinking of bringing him home? Daniel asked gently. Lila looked at the drawing on her wall, the one of the girl with the leash that reached into the stars. Then she looked down at Toby, who had just rolled over awkwardly, exposing his belly with nervous eyes. She smiled, not replacing, just continuing. Toby came home that weekend. He didn't sleep in her bed. Not at first. He didn't follow commands or wear vests or charm crowds. But he followed Lila, from room to room, step by step. And one evening, during a gentle rain, he pressed his head against her hand and gave the smallest, most uncertain tail wag she'd ever seen. She drew it later. Toby, awkward and unsure, next to Echo, sketched in stars. Caption: Healing isn't a finish line, it's a relay. The classroom circle resumed in full by early fall. But now, it was different. Toby didn't wear a vest. He didn't sit calmly in the middle like Echo once did. He paced, sniffed backpacks, occasionally tripped over beanbags, and once stole a crayon and tried to eat it. But the kids loved him, because Toby was real, clumsy, a little broken, just like them. Lila introduced him simply. This is Toby. He's not a therapy dog, but he's trying. The kids giggled. One offered him a cracker. Another tried to teach him sit, only for Toby to flop dramatically onto his side. That day, Lila brought a new sign to the circle. Drawn in soft greens and browns, it read, "You don't have to be perfect to be someone's safe place." Toby licked the corner of the sign and knocked it over. No one minded. The teachers watched in awe as something remarkable happened. Children who had once refused to speak were now gently giving commands, reading stories to Toby, or sitting close just to feel his warm, twitchy body nearby. He wasn't Echo, and that was the point. Because Echo had been the bridge, the one who helped Lila and so many others cross over the worst of it. Toby. Toby was the path forward. At home, Toby still flinched at thunder, still didn't like the sound of blenders. But every night, he curled at the foot of Lila's bed, his body twitching with dreams, her hand resting lightly on his back. She began sketching a new series, one called Toby Tries. In it, Toby attempted everything from skateboarding to baking to sitting still for 2 minutes, which he failed. Each page ended with the same line. Trying is brave, too. Lila didn't sell these books. She stapled them by hand and donated them to classrooms, foster homes, and children's hospitals. Anywhere a kid might need to laugh or feel understood, or believe that they could be enough, even when they stumbled. Because healing wasn't just about surviving. It was about living. Even if you drooled on the rug sometimes, spring brought new beginnings, fresh leaves, warmer mornings, and an unexpected invitation. Mara found it in her inbox one afternoon and read it twice before calling Lila over. "It's from the National Child Wellness Summit," she explained. "They want you to be the closing speaker." Lila blinked. "Me?" "They've read the paw print book. They've seen your drawings. They say your story matters." Lila looked at Toby, who was currently trying to fit into a shoebox and failing spectacularly. She bit her lip. "Do I have to talk?" Mara smiled. "Only if you want to. You can draw, or bring Toby, or do both." So she said yes. The stage was huge. Polished floors, towering screens, hundreds of seats. Lila stood backstage, one hand on Toby's leash, the other gripping her sketchbook. She wasn't shaking. Not this time. When her name was called, she walked out slowly, Toby at her side, tail wagging softly. The spotlight didn't scare her anymore. She reached the microphone, opened her sketchbook, and turned it to face the audience. The first page showed a girl sitting alone in a dark room. The second, a dog with a single paw extended. The third, a circle of children sitting close, eyes gentle. And then, finally, a girl holding a leash that reached toward the sky. She looked up. "My name is Lila," she said. "I didn't talk for a long time, because the world hurt too much. But a dog named Echo listened anyway." She paused, looked down at Toby, who had just flopped over with a loud sigh. "And now I try. I try to talk, I try to draw, I try to help, because trying is enough." Silence. Then applause. It started slow, but grew, not wild, but deep. Moved. Afterward, people lined up not for autographs, but for hugs, for a moment to tell her, "You reminded me of my sister," or "I needed this." One little boy, no older than 6, handed her a folded napkin with a drawing, a brown blob with ears. "This is your dog," he said. Lila smiled. Yeah, he tries his best. And that was all that mattered. Years passed, as they always do. The drawings faded with time, but the memories didn't. Lila grew taller, bolder. Her voice, once a whisper, now spoke on panels at schools, in front of kids who once sat like she used to, curled in themselves, unsure, silent. And Toby? Toby aged too. His wild energy mellowed into slow tail wags and long naps in sunlit corners. He never became a proper therapy dog, but he became Lila's dog, her shadow, her second healer. When Lila turned 16, she held an art exhibit in the local library titled echoes and paw prints. Half of the walls displayed her journey with Echo. The quiet strength, the starlit leashes, the sacred silences. The other half? Toby's chaos, failed tricks, spilled bowls, and scribbled captions like, "Oops. Still worth it. Trying is brave, remember?" Children wandered the gallery with parents. Some laughed, some cried. One small girl stood frozen in front of a piece that showed a child curled around a stuffed animal, while a ghostly outline of a German shepherd stood guard above. Her mother whispered, "That's like your dog, honey." The girl nodded and whispered back, "I miss him." Lila stepped over, knelt beside her, and said quietly, "He's still with you. Just softer now." The girl looked up and smiled, and in that moment, Lila felt it. Not pride, not sorrow, but peace. That rare, quiet knowing that what was broken had not only been rebuilt, but had become something stronger. Later that night, she sat on her porch, sketchbook on her knees, Toby's head resting heavily on her foot. She drew the stars again. Echo's silhouette, her own, now older. Toby chasing something, a butterfly maybe, across the sky. And beneath it, she wrote the final words. Healing never really ends, but neither does love. The wind stirred. Toby huffed in his sleep, and Lila, once voiceless, once shattered, closed the book, smiling, whole. The more Lila grew, the more she noticed something strange. Her story had become a mirror. Not because people were copying her, but because they were seeing themselves in it. At one school visit, a boy approached her in the hallway after everyone else had left. He shoved his hands in his pockets and mumbled, "I don't like talking either." Lila didn't force a smile or offer advice. She just nodded, then handed him a crumpled sketch, a drawing of Toby sitting in front of a closed door, tail wagging, waiting patiently. The boy took it with wide eyes. "You drew this?" She nodded. "For you." Moments like that kept happening. A social worker once told her, "Your silence used to be your wound. Now it's your superpower." That stuck with her. She started teaching art sessions to foster kids, not for therapy, for expression. No rules, no pressure, just crayons, paint, and space. One child painted a giant red dog with wings. Another drew themselves as a bird inside a cage, with the door wide open. Lila didn't analyze or correct. She simply said, "That's beautiful," and meant it. After class, she'd clean up with Toby at her feet, wondering if Echo would have wagged in approval. She thought he would have, because some dogs didn't just help people heal. They helped them pass healing on. That autumn, Lila and Mara returned to the shelter where Echo had once lived. It had changed. Fresh paint on the walls, new cages, brighter lights, but it still smelled like metal and hope. A volunteer greeted them. "Are you here to adopt?" Mara smiled. "We came to visit an old memory." The woman nodded like she understood. "They stay with us, don't they?" Lila wandered toward the back, Toby trotting beside her, tail low but calm. There was a small plaque near the kennels now. It read, "In honor of Echo, a dog who listened and taught us to do the same." Beneath the words was a sketch, one of Lila's early ones, a rough pencil drawing of Echo, sitting beside a girl with a broken heart. She ran her fingers across the plaque. "I didn't know they put this here," she whispered. The volunteer joined her. "You're Lila." She nodded. "We get kids asking about Echo all the time," the woman said. "They sit right here. Some bring drawings. One boy even said he wants to be a dog when he grows up." Lila laughed softly. Echo would have liked that. They spent the afternoon helping out, cleaning, feeding, playing. At one point, a scared puppy refused to come out of its kennel. Lila knelt down and waited, said nothing, just waited. Eventually, the little dog crept forward and nuzzled her shoe. Still got it, Mara whispered from behind. That night, they stood outside the building under the soft glow of the porch light. Do you ever feel like it's all come full circle? Mara asked. Lila looked down at Toby, now curled up in the car, and then up at the stars. Not full circle, she said. Just forward. With loops. One morning, as golden light streamed through the kitchen, Lila found a letter waiting on the counter. Not an email, a real letter, stamped, handwritten, no return address. She hesitated, then opened it. Inside was a single page, shaky handwriting. Dear Lila, I don't know if you remember me, but I was on the jury during the trial. I didn't understand back then, not really. The silence, the dog, your courage. But after reading about you, seeing what you've done, I finally do. You didn't just survive, you made space for the rest of us to wake up. Thank you for not giving up. Sincerely, J. Thompson. Lila stared at it for a long time. She remembered the jury box, the eyes that avoided hers, the hands that fidgeted, the tension. She never expected to hear from any of them, and yet, here it was. She took the letter to her room, placed it inside her old sketchbook, and pressed it between two pages. One page showed Echo sitting in a courtroom, calm and steady. The other showed Lila, years older, surrounded by kids, papers, and a dog who wasn't Echo, but was trying. She added something new, a tiny sketch of a mailbox with wings, flying through the sky. Beneath it, she wrote, "Some things take time to arrive, but they still find you." Later that night, she read the letter to Toby. He didn't react, of course. He was busy trying to eat a blanket, but it didn't matter, because she knew Echo would have wagged, and that was enough. By the time Lila turned 17, her art program had grown beyond anything she imagined. What started as a quiet circle in a single classroom had become a traveling workshop. Draw to speak. She visited shelters, group homes, rural schools, any place where kids needed a way to tell the world who they were without using words. Toby always came along, of course, though now he preferred naps in the corner over running around. One weekend, they visited a school tucked between mountains, so remote the GPS gave up halfway. The classroom was small, 15 kids, big windows, quiet stairs. Lila brought crayons, markers, charcoal, and silence. She didn't give instructions. She just sat down and began drawing. Toby rested his chin on her foot. One by one, the kids followed. They drew trees with broken branches, dogs with wings, houses on fire with people standing safely outside. One boy drew only dots. At first, random, then patterned. Morse code, maybe? Lila leaned over and tapped his page gently. He whispered, "It says I'm here." She whispered back, "I see you." When the session ended, the teacher pulled her aside. "That boy hasn't spoken in 2 years," she said. "You cracked something open." Lila shook her head. "He opened it himself. I just gave him a pencil." That night, in their small rented room, Lila sat with Toby on the floor. He was snoring softly, paws twitching. She opened her travel sketchbook and drew. A trail of kids, each holding pencils that glowed like lanterns, walking through a dark forest. Leading them all was a girl. At her side, a dog made of stars, and beside them, in the branches above, sat Echo, watching. She didn't need words for this one. Just a title. We Find Each Other. Toby passed on a soft spring morning. There was no warning, no pain, just a final stretch beside Lila's bed, a quiet sigh, and stillness. She knew it was coming. He had slowed in the last weeks, didn't chase birds, didn't steal socks, just followed her with tired eyes and stayed close. She buried him beside Echo, under the tall maple in the backyard. No fancy stone, just two names carved into smooth river rocks. Echo, the listener. Toby, the trier. She sat between them for hours, sketchbook on her lap, pencil unmoving. For the first time in years, she didn't know what to draw, until a breeze came, soft, lifting her hair, rustling the pages, and she saw it. Two dogs, one made of stardust, the other of sunlight, running through a field of paper flowers, and in the center, a girl, grown now, arms wide open. She titled it, They Carried Me. Weeks later, her first full graphic novel hit shelves. It wasn't about trauma. It wasn't about rescue. It was about hope. The back cover had no author photo, just a quote. Sometimes, the ones who save us don't speak, but they stay, long after the barking ends. Lila kept traveling, kept drawing, kept listening. She met kids with stories too heavy for their age, sat with them in circles, handed them crayons like keys, and when they asked if her dogs were real, she'd smile and say, "The realist." Years down the line, someone asked her, "Do you ever stop missing them?" She looked up from her sketchpad, eyes soft. "No," she said, "but I learned to carry the love, not the weight." And then she went back to drawing. A new dog now, all fluff and floppy ears, trying to sit still while chewing a pencil. Because the circle didn't end, it simply grew.